Welcome back to Let's Make a Game. In this video, I would like to continue talking about creating an inventory and shop system for your game. Specifically, in the last video in this series, I mentioned that we didn't yet have a way to sell items to shops. We could buy from them, but not sell to them. Well, I've added a system that allows you to sell items, and I will demonstrate that in this and in the next video because it required a fair few changes to the code. As you can see, we're inside a shop. We've picked up some items. We can click on them to sell them to the shopkeeper, except for this one, and it's obvious why. When we hover over it, it says it has a selling price of 0. That is, the shop isn't interested in it. Perhaps they're superstitious. They don't want to buy something that's to do with death because they're afraid it'll anger the spirit of the dead person, something like that. That would make a lot of sense in a fantasy world. But in any case, it has a selling price of 0, and therefore, when we hover over it, we don't get the option to click it. But we can, for example, sell this teapot. And it appears for sale for twice the cost that we sold it, because I've arbitrarily assumed that the shops will buy things for half the price that they sell them for. Having sold the item, we now have a problem that we've created for ourselves, which is that when we buy a shield or a dagger, the items that sort of start for sale in the shop, we don't want there to be only one of those for sale. We want to be able to buy a dagger and for the shop to still have daggers, and indeed that does happen. But we don't want that to happen for the teapot. We want the computer to be able to see, well, this teapot is a unique item which we sold to the shop, so they shouldn't have more of them in stock. And indeed, if we do buy it back, we see that that works. It disappears from the items for sale and appears in our inventory. So I'm going to spend the rest of this video and the next video talking about the code. You can see, if you've been following the series, that there is a new passage, sell item, which is sort of the equivalent to buy item. There are no new variables that we need. There are changes to an existing variable, the items array. Specifically, firstly, we give every item a value. So previously it was just ones that were for sale, but now, because we can sell anything potentially, we need to know how much the shop is going to buy it for, if it's going to buy it at all. So in slot 3, several items now have a number. Sometimes that number will be 0, meaning it's not going to be sold, but in most of the cases you'll find that, yeah, there is a number there. It is the buying price of the item. In other words, it's what that item's going to cost you from the shops. And half of that is what you can sell it for. The other thing is that we need a new slot. Slot 5 is set to 1 for unique items sold to a shop so that buying it doesn't create a copy. In other words, this is the slot that distinguishes items that are in the shop, which are unique items we sold to the shop, from items that are in the shop that are standard stock of the shop and therefore that they have an unlimited number of. So let's have a look at the details page. Most of the changes take place in the details page, and of course the sell item is a new passage, so that's all changes. So we start with a reordering. So this is telling you where you are. This is the buttons that allow you to move. We've dealt with them and we haven't made any changes to those for a while. But here is a new change. We have this code that has a look and says, are we in a shop? In other words, are we in a place where there are any items for sale? Well, we already had this code, so I won't go through it in detail. I will say that I've set the variable to a different variable so that we don't have a name that we use later on. And I've moved it because this code was right down the bottom. I've moved it up to the top. And the reason we move it up to the top is because we used to show inventory, loose items, and then items for sale if there were any items for sale. What I've decided instead is that we have inventory, and then if we're in a shop, we have items for sale, and if we're not in a shop, we have loose items. So in other words, you can't drop and pick up items in a shop. It didn't make a lot of sense to me that you could come into a shop and drop something and just go, I'm just going to leave that here, and then leave indefinitely and come back and pick it up. So instead of having the 3, you have only 2. You have inventory and then one of the other 2. And so therefore we need to know which one we're dealing with at the very beginning. Well, we could have put it after inventory, but I put it before we print inventory. And that, unfortunately, is all the time that I have. So I will go through the rest of the code in the next video. I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.